أتيتك يا خالقي باكيا ودمع الأسى كل حين يزيد فقد قلت في الآي لا تقنطوا وإن تعف عني فذا يوم عيد وإن تعف عني.
الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Today, inshallah, what we want to do is we're going to look at the collection of Abu Abd-ir-Raḥmān, Aḥmad ibn Shuḥayb al-Nasā'ī, rahmatullahi alayh, who was born in the year 215 after the Hijrah in the city of Nasa. And Wallahu ta'ala alam, it is said that the city was called Nasa because at the time it was being conquered by the Muslims, the men of that city were absent, and it was the women who fought in place of the men, or the Nisa who fought in place of the men, and because of that it was called Nasa. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam. But in any case, this city is or was in the region of Khurasan, which is in modern day Iran. And similar to other scholars that we spoke about, An-Nasa'i rahmatullahi alayhi, he first began taking knowledge from the scholars of his local area before he began to travel. But it would seem that he began to travel, or he started traveling at a very early age, because he himself narrates that in the year 230 after the Hijrah, he went or he traveled to Baghlan, which is in modern day Afghanistan, and it is there that he began to study from Qutayba ibn Sa'id al-Thaqafi. And he spent about a year and 2 months with him, learning from him and taking a hadith from him, in fact narrating much from him. And Qutayba ibn Sa'id rahmatullahi alayhi, he is one of the great Imams of Hadith. He is a student of Al-Layth ibn Sa'ad, and he's a student of Imam Malik, and he's a student of Sufyan ibn Uyayna, so he had great teachers, and he himself was a great teacher, being the teacher of Ibn Abi Shayba, and the teacher of Imam Ahmad, and the teacher of Imam al-Bukhari, and Muslim, and Ibn Majah, and Abu Dawood, and At-Tirmidhi, and others. So An-Nasa'i rahmatullahi alayh, he learned from one of the great shuyukh, and some of the other shuyukh as well that were shared by these scholars of hadith. And one of the other scholars that he learned from was Ishaq ibn Rahawayh, and he must have heard from him fairly early on, because An-Nasa'i was only about 23 years old when Ishaq ibn Rahawayh had passed away. So again, we can see an early start to gathering a hadith and taking from the scholars of knowledge, especially the reputable scholars of hadith. So of course, Imam An-Nasa'i himself would become someone of great reputation himself. And probably his most famous student is Abu Ja'far Ahmad ibn Muhammad al-Tahawi, rahmatullahi alayhi, who died in the year 321 after the Hijrah. And we might know him if we've studied, or if we've come across what's called al-Aqidah al-Tahawiyya. And this is a treatise on Aqidah written by Imam al-Tahawi rahmatullahi alayhi, who is one of the fuqaha of the Hanafiyya. As for the writings, then Imam An-Nasa'i had a number of works, and amongst his works is Tafsir al-Quran, and this is a compilation of a hadith reported concerning some of the suwar of the Quran and some of the ayat of the Quran, and this is a print that's available to us today. And there's also, and similar to that, he also has a book called Fada'il al-Quran, the virtues of the Quran, and this is a collection of 126 hadith having to do with not just the virtues of the Quran as the name would imply, but it also has to do with how the Quran was sent down, how it was revealed, who were some of the writers of the Quran, who were those who preserved the Quran, and of course the virtues of some of the surah and some of the ayat of the Quran. And this is also a publication that's available to us today. And he has a book called Khasa'is Ali. This is a book that has about 185 narrations having to specifically do with Ali radhiyallahu anhu, and unfortunately many of these ahadith are weak or not acceptable ahadith. And one of the books he's well known for is Amal al-Yawm wal-Layla, the deeds of the day and night, and this is a collection of 1,141 ahadith having to do with some of the actions and sayings that a person should do during the day and during the night, so just as the title suggests. And he has a book called, and that book is available to us today as well. And he also has what's called Al-Du'afa wal-Matrukin, and this is a collection where Imam an-Nasa'i spoke about 706 narrators of Ḥadīth or scholars of Hadith that he considered to be weak or abandoned. And this is an important collection for any student of knowledge to refer to when studying Hadith, and specifically when studying the narrators, because Imam an-Nasa'i is considered to be one of the great scholars, or one of the most relied upon scholars when it comes to jarh. Meaning if he's weakening a person. We're going to discuss this in a little bit, inshallah, as well. The collection that we want to discuss today is a collection referred to as as-Sunan. And there's in fact two main collections, as-Sunan al-Kubrā and as-Sunan as-Ṣuġrā. And the latter, as-Sunan as-Ṣuġrā, is also referred to as al-Mujtabā minas-Sunan. Al-Mujtabā minas-Sunan, and I'll discuss the meaning of that in just a minute, inshallah. But the first one we want to look at is as-Sunan al-Kubrā. And as-Sunan al-Kubrā is a collection of 11,949 ahadith arranged according to chapters. And what makes this collection a significant collection for any student of knowledge is because Imam an-Nasa'i, after he narrates a hadith, he would sometimes narrate or mention how there was differing in this hadith. So he would narrate a hadith, and then he would either give an isnad, a different isnad to this hadith, or a different metin to a hadith, or sometimes both an isnad and a metin to that hadith that differs from one of the ones that he narrated. And then he would also often speak about what the reason is for not accepting that specific isnad or that specific metin. So he would comment on these hadith, and from this, student of knowledge can learn why a specific isnad might not be accepted, or why a specific metin might not be accepted, or even a hadith as a whole, why it might not be accepted because of the differing that comes with it, and what is considered acceptable from it and what is considered rejected. So again, this is a very important collection for the students of Hadith. Now the next collection, or the second collection, is Al-Mujtabā minas-Sunan, and it's also referred to as as-Sunan as-Ṣuġrā, or Sunan an-Nasā'ī as-Ṣuġrā, or it's also referred to as simply Sunan an-Nasā'ī. So usually when we refer, or when we're specifically speaking about Sunan an-Nasā'ī, this is the collection that's being referred to, not al-Kubra. And Sunan an-Nasā'ī, or al-Mujtabā minas-Sunan, then this is a collection of 5,761 ahadith. So about half the number of ahadith that we'll find in the other one, in the other collection. But this collection here, and it is said, Wallahu ta'ala a'lam, that when An-Nasa'i had completed as-Sunan al-Kubra, the first collection we spoke about, he had gifted it to an emir. So he gave it as a gift to an emir, and the emir had asked him, is everything in this, is all of it sahih? And Imam An-Nasa'i said no. So he said, faktub lana minhu sahih, write from it, take what is, or write for us only that which is sahih. And it is said that Imam An-Nasa'i then compiled as-Sunan as-Ṣuġrā, or al-Mujtabā minas-Sunan. Al-Mujtabā means those which are chosen, or the hadith that are chosen from his collection of as-Sunan, referring to the other book. And Wallahu ta'ala alam, there's this narration, there's the authenticity of this narration is questionable. And although the narrations in Al-Mujtabā they are all narrations from An-Nasa'i, so there's no doubt that these narrations are narrations from An-Nasa'i. But the question is whether it is An-Nasa'i himself who compiled this collection, or some have said that it is his student Abu Bakr ibn Sunni who compiled it. And Al-Dhahabi rahmatullahi alayh, he was one of the ones who insisted that it was the latter who wrote it, meaning Abu Bakr ibn Sunni, or Ibn Sunni. He's the one that had actually compiled Al-Mujtabā and put it together, and not An-Nasa'i. So he put it together, this collection of hadith. And it seems to me, Wallahu ta'ala a'lam, after looking at some of the arguments, that this collection, Al-Mujtabā minas-Sunan, is actually a collection of An-Nasa'i and not the collection of Ibn Sunni, as Al-Dhahabi stated, and others afterwards. So those who also took this opinion, they really basically relied on the statement of Al-Dhahabi to come to this conclusion. But the reason why, there's a number of reasons why that led me to accept that Al-Mujtabā minas-Sunan is actually a collection from An-Nasa'i, not Ibn Sunni, or he's the one that put it together like he himself. And the first is that if it was supposed to be an abridged version of al-Kubra, then we will find narrations in al-Mujtaba that we will not find in al-Kubra. And normally someone who comes afterwards, who's abridging a work from an original piece of work, they're not going to add something to the abridged version that you won't find in the original work. So especially like students who are summarizing the work of a Shaykh, they're not going to add something that the Shaykh himself never added to the original collection. So that's one reason. The second reason is also we'll find chapters in Al-Mujtabā minas-Sunan or as-Sunan as-Suġrā that we won't find in Al-Kubra. So for example, you'll have Kitab al-Imān and you'll have Kitab al-Sulh and other chapters that you won't find in Al-Kubra. So similar to the other to the previous point that we just mentioned, it's usually a scholar himself who will do that. So if, for example, there was something he left out in Al-Kubra and he felt that it needed to be included because of the value of the ahadith or the value that it brings to the book, then he will add it to the abridged version. But someone who's a student usually won't do that, especially if it's an abridged work from their teacher. And to the best of what I've read as well, the third point, to the best of what I've read, no one preceded al-Dhahabi rahmatullahi alayh in making this claim. So those before al-Dhahabi, when they refer to al-Mujtabā or they refer to as-Sunan as-Suġrā, then they refer to it as a collection of an-Nasaa'ee, and they never made reference to Ibn Sunni being the one who had compiled it. So al-Dhahabi rahmatullahi alayh seems to be the first who came up with this, but this rejection is speculative at best. There's nothing concrete for him to suggest or to say that it was the work of Ibn Sunni and not an-Nasa'i, or anything that he did claim or did mention to support this claim, or those who came after him and mentioned things to support this claim, then they're not the strongest of arguments. And there's at least 370 years between al-Dhahabi and an-Nasa'i. So even the Shaykh of al-Dhahabi, al-Mizzi, when he referred to al-Mujtabā, then he referred to it as being the work of an-Nasa'i. As well, we can say that in a few places in Al-Mujtabā, Ibn Sunni states that he heard it from the author or from the author An-Nasa'i in Egypt. And in certain manuscripts as well, we'll find that Ibn Sunni was not the only one who recorded it from An-Nasa'i. There are others, including the son of An-Nasa'i, who had reported this work, but it seems like the work of Ibn Sunni was the most authoritative or the most complete, so it has become the most relied upon work. Wallahu ta'ala alam. Some might ask, well, what's the significance of, trying to determine or trying to affirm who this book belongs to? And the significance to this is that if the collection is meant to be a collection of sahih ahadith, or sahih hadith according to the author, then one can say that if this work is actually attributed to an-Nasa'i or is the work of an-Nasa'i, then the ahadith that he included in there are ahadith that he considered to be authentic ahadith. That doesn't necessarily mean that all the ahadith in there are authentic, but according to the author, or what the author concluded, was that these ahadith were authentic ahadith. Now, the other thing I want to mention is that in Al-Kubra, we do find a lot of commentary and criticism on ahadith. In Al-Mujtabā, it's not as much, but it is there as well. So Imām An-Nasā'ī, he did include ahadith where he also weakened. And this is not an argument to say that this means that it wasn't his collection, as some have stated, but rather what it shows is that he included a hadith similar to like Al-Bukhari, if he included a hadith in his chapter, or he included maybe follow-up or supporting narrations. Those narrations may be weak, and they may be, or not at the level of authenticity of the narrations that he did rely upon in his chapter. So a similar argument or case can be made for An-Nasa'i, but the vast majority of ahadith in there were at least authentic according to the author. Now, some scholars did mention that An-Nasa'i was stricter than Imam al-Bukhari and the main reason for that is Imam An-Nasa'i, he weakened some of the narrators that al-Bukhari had accepted. Now, this doesn't mean that the collection, as I mentioned, the collection of An-Nasa'i is considered an authentic or sahih collection, but the vast majority of ahadith in that collection are authentic collections, especially the ones that he didn't comment on or weaken himself. In fact, many place the Sunan of An-Nasa'i And now when we're speaking about as-Sunan an-Nasā'ī, we're speaking about al-Mujtabā, not as-Sunan al-Kubra, but as-Sunan an-Nasā'ī to be after the Sahih of Imam al-Bukhari and after the Sahih of Imam Muslim. So if we're looking at order, then, or if we're speaking about just the order of Sunan, now we're just speaking about the Sunan collections, then the most authoritative or authentic of them would be the Sunan of An-Nasa'i, and then the scholars usually place Sunan ad-Darimi after that, then Sunan Abi Dawud, and then Sunan at-Tirmidhi, and then Sunan ibn Majah. So this is usually the based on the level of authenticity or the number of authentic narrations compared to weak narrations that we find in the books, then Sunan an-Nasā'ī is considered to be the strongest of them. And then if we're looking at some of the books that we've mentioned as a whole, then usually they put the Muwatta of Imam Malik as being the first. And the reason for that is because there's very few ahadith in the Muwatta of Imam Malik that you won't find in the Sahih of Imam al-Bukhari and Imam Muslim. So he preceded them in this, and as we mentioned, the connected chains that go to the Prophet ﷺ in the Muwatta of Imam Malik are all authentic ahadith. So we have the Muwatta of Imam Malik, then we have the Sahih of Imam al-Bukhari, then we have the Sahih of Imam Muslim, and then we have the Sunan of An-Nasa'i, then we have Sunan ad-Darimi, then we have Sunan Abi Dawud, and then after Sunan Abi Dawud usually comes the Musnad of Imam Ahmad, and then Sunan at-Tirmidhi, and then Sunan ibn Majah. And usually, and it's not surprising to find differing in this, but Wallahu ta'ala a'lam, this seems to be a good order if someone's trying to determine the level of authenticity of the books or where they're ranked when we're looking at the authenticity of books. As for the death of Imam an-Nasa'i, then there's a bit of differing concerning where he died and the month that he died. Ad-Daraqutni rahmatullahi alayhi, he narrates that Imam an-Nasa'i, when he was in Egypt, he became well known for his knowledge in Hadith, what is authentic and what is weak, and when it came to the knowledge of the men. So Imam an-Nasa'i became very esteemed amongst the people of Egypt. But this also led to some hasad, or some enmity, jealousy and enmity against him, and because of that they kicked him out or expelled him from Egypt. So in the narration of Daraqutni, then he went to Ash-Sham, and when he reached Ash-Sham, the people of Ash-Sham, who were strong supporters of Muawiyah, they asked Imam an-Nasa'i to write a book about Muawiyah radhiallahu ta'ala anhu, because he basically had a book on the virtues of Ali, or that which Ali radhiallahu ta'ala anhu was singled out on. So they wanted a book similar to that when it came to Muawiyah. And Imam an-Nasa'i refused to do it, and because of that he was beaten severely, to the point that he would eventually die from his injuries. But before he died, he asked the people of Ash-Sham to take him to Mecca and bury him there. And when he did reach Mecca, I guess it was there or along the way that he died. And it is said that he was buried between the mountain of As-Safa and Marwa, and that he died in the month of Sha'ban in the year 303 after the Hijrah. Now, Abu Sa'id ibn Yunus and Abu Ja'far al-Tahawi, they both narrate that after he left Egypt, he went to Palestine. So this was in the year 302 after the Hijrah, when he was expelled from Egypt. He went to Palestine, and it is there that he died in the month of Safar in the year 303 after the Hijrah, and he was buried there. So they differ when it comes to the month that he died, and they differ when it comes to his place of burial. Al-Dhahabi rahmatullahi alayhi favored this narration over the narration of Ad-Daraqutni, and this is basically because Abu Sa'id ibn Yunus and Abu Ja'far al-Tahawi are from the students of Imam an-Nasa'i, so they would probably know best about his circumstances compared to others who came later on. And with this, inshallah, we'll stop, and in our next lesson we'll speak about the Muntaqa of Ibn Jarud, and we'll also speak about the Musnad of Abu Ya'la al-Musali. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.